Shalom, Hamster Garden Suburb Synagogue, and welcome to the Shabbat Hagadol Drasha for 5781-2021. Once again, we are doing a Shabbat Hagadol Drasha that is not quite live. The good news is it will also appear live tomorrow after Mincha, but realizing that so many of you are still not yet back in shul, we are also doing this over Facebook Live today. The topic of today's Shabbat Hagadol Drasha, which is the special sermon that we have immediately prior to Pesach. Now, normally it's on the Shabbos just before Pesach, but this year, Shabbos just before Pesach is going into the festival, so we hold it a week early. The topic today is insights from three of our Gedolim, our great leaders, great rabbinic leaders who passed, sadly, over the last year. Today we're going to be looking at insights from Rabbi Lord Sachs of blessed memory, from Rabbi Twerski, Rabbi Professor Dr. Twerski, Abraham Twerski of blessed memory, and from Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz Even Yisrael of blessed memory. They all have fantastic Haggadahs. I encourage you, please do pick up one of them. But I'm going to look at the Haggadah thematically, walk through various favorite pieces in the Haggadah, and discuss what do these three Gedolim, these three Torah giants say about each of these parts of the Haggadah. We begin with Ha-Lachma Anya. This is the bread of affliction. The Haggadah reads, this is the bread of affliction that our fathers ate when they were in Egypt. All who are hungry, come and join us, come and eat. Anyone who's needy, please come in. Now, of course, this is very hard, especially for us knowing that we can't have anybody in our homes for a second year running. The good news is that as of Chol Hamoed, at least in our gardens, we are allowed to break bread with other people. We then say, L'shana haba b'nei Charen, next year may we be free people, L'shana haba. The next year may we be in the land of Israel. What's going on in this part of the Haggadah? I begin with Rabbi Twerski, who says, just before we do this is the bread of affliction, what are we reciting the Haggadah over? The broken matzah, the bread of affliction. Now, when we do that yachatz, the breaking of the matzah, we have to break it into two halves, and then the larger half we save for the afikoman, and the smaller half we replace because we're going to use it for the mitzvah of the eating of the matzah when we get to the meal. Now, by definition, as you all know, there is no such thing as bigger half and smaller half. Two halves imply exactly the same. But inevitably, because we are humans who are cracking the matzah, one half is going to be bigger than the other half. So how do you determine which one to put away? So Rabbi Twerski tells the story of one individual who was sitting at the Pesach Seder of his Hasidic Rebbe, and he's examining to try to figure out, he'd done a pretty good division between the two halves of the matzah. Now he's trying to figure out which one exactly was the bigger half. Listen to what the Rebbe said to this young man. He says, greatness is not measured in millimeters. Greatness that is measured in millimeters is not greatness at all. If that's the level that we're going to measure greatness, maybe the lesser one is truly the greater one. And sometimes in life, we think that we have to be just this little bit better in every aspect. No, we have to focus on our humility firstly, humility before any attempt at greatness, because humility, of course, allows us to grow, allows us to tune into those who are indeed great and learn from them, and almost by osmosis and organic measure, you will become great. The next idea, let me share with you from Rabbi Steinsaltz, who says that really, what was this Pesach night all about? Back in ancient times, it was about the Pesach sacrifice. We would come on the 14th of Nisan, Erev Pesach. We would offer our sacrifice in the Holy Temple. We would then join as families and households and partake of that sacrifice. That was the Seder night. Post-temple, we no longer have that. Why don't we have the temple? Our sages tell us, due to sinas chinam, baseless hatred. What's baseless hatred? Baseless hatred means has nothing to do with anything that the other person did. I just don't like them because they're not like me. They're a little different. And so I have this, I don't like the way they talk, their accent, I don't like the way they look. That's baseless hatred. It's not for anything that actually happened. Just don't like the person. That's how the temple was destroyed. Now, on this night of Pesach, in order to reinstate our true Seder night, says Rabbi Twerski, we open up our homes. Kol Ditzrich, anybody who needs, come in, partake. We don't care who you are. We want to be able to create an atmosphere of ahavas chinam, baseless love, because that's how the temple is going to be rebuilt, and that's how we will be able to partake of a real Seder, the real consumption of the Pesach meal with the sacrifice. And that's why we finish the paragraph, L'shana haba ba'aret Israel. Next year, may we be in the land of Israel. It's not just the state of Israel. We want a land of Israel with a reinstated holy temple to be able to offer our Pesach sacrifice and have our Seder the way it was meant to be. Third idea from Rabbi Sachs. He says, what are we doing as soon as we open the Seder? We are sharing our food with others. You see, a slave is barely able to subsist on the food that they have. They didn't have the opportunity to share it with anybody else. He tells a story as they were being liberated from the camps and they had morsels of food. The first sign of freedom is the ability to share your portion with someone else. So immediately as we begin the Seder, we say, we are free men. We have the ability to be able to provide for others. So that's freedom. Freedom is control of your destiny and the ability to be able to contribute on your terms, not because you're being dictated to. Let's celebrate that this Pesach. The next part of the Seder I want to have a look at is the Manishtana. Right, pretty straightforward. We've got 4 questions that the children ask. Let's walk it through our Gedolim. First of all, Rabbi Twerski, he says that what are we doing now? We are setting the tone for the night that it's all about the children. They must ask the questions. The children. Right? In fact, the Talmud tells us it's about, you can't just skip over the questions and go straight to the answers. Your children have to ask. If you don't have children, the Talmud says, then have your spouse ask. If you don't have a spouse, then you yourself should ask yourself the questions and respond. But primarily, it's about the children. Why? Well, the first time that Moshe comes to Pharaoh and Pharaoh actually acquiesces to us leaving Egypt, he says, oh, whoa. You can't all go. I will let the adults leave. You don't need the whole mishpacha. And Moshe says, no. He says, we need everybody. Binarenu vizkenenu nelech. With our children and with our elders, we will go. Ki chag Hashem lanu, because it is a festive day of God for us. Without the children, what are we here for? And so Rabbi Twerski says, this is our response to Pharaoh. We are opening up saying that we are committed to our children, to the future of Judaism. And that's why we as a nation have always been the first to educate children, to insist on children's education above all else, that all children deserve a Jewish education. All children must be literate, must be able to read and write. This is a relatively new phenomenon for most of the world, but for Judaism, it's always been integral to who we are. Next, we have, and just to add from Rabbi Twerski as well, he says that the notion of questions and impressing upon our children to ask questions is to let them know that it's okay to ask questions in life. And some questions will have answers, and some questions will not have answers. And to live with conflict that's life. We live in an age today, says Rabbi Twerski, where we expect instant gratification, spontaneous responses to our issues in life, quick fixes. But Judaism acknowledges that there's not always a quick fix. We don't know all the answers. Sometimes there are questions that are bigger than the answers. There's an ancient Yiddish aphorism that says, popular Yiddish aphorism that says, auf a kasha startet man nicht. Nobody ever died from a question. So you have a question. You figure it out, you think about it, try to resolve it, but not everything is resolvable. Conflict in life sometimes is something that we live with. That's the point, says Rabbi Twerski. It actually ties in strongly to an idea that Rabbi Sachs says elsewhere, where we begin our Pesach story with the conflict of even Terach and the way that we came from idolaters. We were slaves in Egypt, and then things got better. But it wasn't as if we were redeemed and automatically into the promised land. No, it's a journey that continues throughout life. There's no happy ending to this story. Maybe one day. We're not there yet. We've never claimed that the exodus from Egypt is the grand happy ending. No, we dealt with the conflict. This is how we deal with conflict. And we continue to deal with conflict. The Pesach Seder is a model to teach us how to deal with the vicissitudes of life. Not that we have all the answers. We have questions, and we try to answer the questions. Next, we move on to Rabbi Steinsaltz. He says, interesting wording of the Manishtana. We don't say, normally we would say, no matter what time of day we're going to ask a question, we say, why is today different from every other day? He says, no, whoa, that's not the question. Why is tonight different? Manishtana halayla hazeh. Why is tonight different from every other night? See, normally, night is a time of darkness. Night is the time of constriction, not knowing what tomorrow will bring. Not Pesach night. Pesach night, we were redeemed. Pesach night is a night of light, of redemption. Why is this night different? And how do we create from this different nights that will be challenges throughout our lives that will also be brightened? How do we take Pesach and transform all of the night times of our life? Then we have Rabbi Sachs. Rabbi Sachs says that when it comes to the word for inheritance in Judaism, there are two words, Nachala and Yerusha. Nachala is related to the word Nachal, meaning a river. Kind of flows, you get an inheritance, flows from one generation to the next as like a river flows, no real effort. Yerusha is related to the word lahorish, which means to conquer. It means it takes effort. Rabbi Sachs says that what we are impressing upon our children by telling them, ask the questions, is we're not just going to give you this Judaism on a silver platter. We're going to make you beg for it. We're going to make you sing for your supper. You're going to have to work for it if you truly are going to appreciate it and want to sustain it and maintain it in your life and pass it on to the next generation. If we simply had our children sit there and, okay, lecture to them, okay, here are the answers, here's our story, they would have no ownership. We say, no, I'm not giving you the answers to why we're here, let alone dinner, unless you start asking some serious questions. Realize that not all the questions are going to be the same for all of the children. We'll get to that soon. But you have to be at least aware that this is an effort you have to make in order to own it yourself. So let's indeed then move on to our 4 children who are asking various questions. We'll focus on the first son, just because of the limitations of time. What does Rabbi Twerski say? Rabbi Twerski says when the Chacham, the wise son, asks what we're doing here at the Pesach Seder, we tell him a story and we say, oh, and by the way, You can't eat anything after the Afikoman. Who cares? I mean, what is that? Is that the essence of Pesach? You can't eat anything after the Afikoman? Seriously, there's so much more to Pesach. Think about the bondage in Egypt and the great redemption and the plagues and the splitting of the sea. Oh, you can't eat anything after the Afikoman. Shkoyach. What are we telling him? Says Rabbi Twerski that we celebrate our freedom, our physical freedom. And that's sweet. Physical freedom tastes sweet. All of the food at the meal is going to be sweet. We're going to eat dessert. It's going to stay on our tongue. But what do we go to bed with tonight? What do we leave the evening with? The bitter taste of the matzah. It's not bitter, but it's a taste that's not that exciting. That's the taste that lingers in our mouth. Afikomen is what we walk away with. That's the true taste of freedom. The memory that this is about spiritual freedom, the mitzvah, that's the true occurrence of Pesach. The physical freedom, that's only a vehicle to the spiritual freedom that we would ultimately receive as we marched our way to Sinai to receive the Torah. But if our taste as we walk away is the ice cream, we've missed the point. Our taste as we walk away from the Seder needs to be that Afikomen. Next, we have Rabbi Steinsaltz, who says, this is the Chacham, remember. This is the wise son. We don't dumb it down for him. We tell him everything, all of the laws and statutes, testimonies, everything right down to even the rabbinic laws. Afikomen. Don't eat anything after the Afikomen. Let's say that in the Torah. No, well, you have to know. We have Torah law, we have rabbinic enactments, all part and parcel of our heritage. You are the Chacham. You understand that. We are going to tell you everything because we know that you can handle it. That's the message that we're giving to the Chacham. And then we have Rabbi Sachs. Rabbi Sachs looks at the text and he says, well, where do we find these scriptural sources for our 4 children? 3 of them occur in the book of Shemot, the book of Exodus. The 4th occurs in the book of Devarim, Deuteronomy. Now, the book of Exodus takes place at the time of our redemption from Egypt and within the 1st year. We then, sometime in the book of Numbers, we fail to enter the land of Canaan due to the spies, and we are left wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. So the book of Deuteronomy takes place 40 years later. 40 years later, we have this response to the Chacham. It doesn't go in the Haggadah in chronological order, or even in the order that it appears in the Chumash, in the Torah. We have the responses moved around to suit our order for the Seder, but really the response to the Chacham is the 4th pasuk, the 4th verse in its appearance in the Torah, and doesn't appear until 40 years later in the book of Devarim. Listen to what Rabbi Sachs says. He says the wise son happens 40 years later because historical understanding takes time. It's not until we've traversed that wilderness that we can look back and we can say, now I understand why I had all of those trials and tribulations in my life, why all of those things happened to me. Now, looking back on 40 years, it all makes sense. We deal with issues in our lives. At the time, it seems that they're impossible. But then we turn around years later, we say, Almighty God, wow, you really had my best interests in mind the entire time. And how did I fail to appreciate it way back then? There was no way that I could have. But now in hindsight, I feel so blessed. That's true wisdom. True wisdom is the ability to be able to be patient and know that the Almighty will provide the answer in due course. Moving along, we have the 10 plagues. Now, Rabbi Twerski asks the question. Rabbi Twerski, who was an eminent psychiatrist, says, how could Pharaoh repeat the same mistake over and over? Let my people go? No, I won't let your people go. Okay, I'm going to bring a plague. Brings a plague, devastates Egypt. Okay. Take the plague away. I will let the people go. Takes the plague away. Moshe comes to Pharaoh, let my people go. No, I'm not going to let the people go. And once again, and again, and again, another plague. How is that even possible? Says Rabbi Dr. Twerski. He says, making those decisions has nothing to do with intelligence. Pharaoh might have been a very intelligent individual, but it's typical of addictive behavior. Rabbi Twerski ran a rehab center. He dealt with drug and alcohol addiction all the time. And he says that it's normal to engage in addictive behavior and then relapse. Relapse is natural. Until the addict examines their core values, they will necessarily relapse into what they were doing. They fix themselves and then fall back because their core values never changed. He said it's really important when you're dealing with addiction that you have a mentor, that you have someone to talk to who can advise you objectively what you're doing wrong, and tell you how you're going to fix the situation, improve the situation. Pharaoh had his advisors. His advisors said, are you a fool? Let the people go. And Pharaoh ignored his advisors. And Pharaoh continued to be obstinate. When we don't listen to others, when we think that we know the answers, we're too close to ourselves and we are bound to fail. Okay, we then have Rabbi Steinsaltz. Rabbi Steinsaltz says, he looks at the mnemonic at the end of the plagues. Rabbi Yehuda would say that there is a way to remember the plagues. Detzach adash ba'achav. He says, well, that's a little obvious, isn't it? Everybody knows how to put letters together. What's Rabbi Yehuda telling us? He says, well, the words are related to, Detzach is related to ditza, meaning joy. Adash is related to being quiet, and ba'achav is related to love. So if you read those three words, it's joy, silent, until love. Meaning to say that, yes, we're joyous now, but there's a certain silence that we need to maintain until the ultimate redemption. We're not there yet. We've had the plagues. We've been redeemed from Egypt. But no, always remember the mnemonic, always remember that the true joy, the ultimate joy, will come when we have the ultimate redemption, when we are returned to our homeland, or even for those who left Egypt, when they would reach the promised land. That's what they have to remain a little less joyous until they reach that point. And that's why we pour out that bit of wine with each of those plagues, knowing that our joy is incomplete because we're not yet there at the promised land with the ultimate redemption. The third idea from Rabbi Sachs, he says each of the plagues was so symbolic. Why did the water turn to blood? Well, it was almost as if, and he quotes what God says to Cain after he kills Abel, the blood of your brother is crying out to me from the ground. Well, what happened in the Nile? The Egyptians had killed the baby boys of the Jews, of the Hebrews. So it was as if the blood was coming up from the river, and now they could see this was the genocide that you committed. I think it's always important that we remind ourselves of this point. We go through the Seder and we say, we were slaves and now we're free. It was hard and now it's easy. No, it was genocide. Pharaoh killed our babies and then we left. So that's the first plague. The second plague of the frogs, says Rabbi Sachs, was to prove a point where here we have the Egyptians, every time they want to show Moshe that they could also do the plagues, you made frogs, we can also make frogs. Well, did you make life any easier for yourselves? Sometimes we try to prove a point and we just exacerbate. We shoot ourselves in the foot in order just to prove our own point. They made Egypt more chaotic just to show that they could. And then the lice, says Rabbi Sachs. Lice? Lice in Egypt, everything was big. Big meant good. Lice showed that even the tiniest little insect can destroy it all. Only God is in control. Let's move on to Dayenu. What do we say in Dayenu? Says Rabbi Twerski, if you look at the verses, some of them are big things, and some of them are little miracles, and we say, thank you, God, for those little things. Says Rabbi Twerski, when it comes to our attitude of gratitude, we have to thank God and others in our lives, even for the most minute things, futile steps along the way, because that habituates us to form good relationships, to thank people for those things that we need to. Sometimes we're concerned, oh, if I thank them, I might owe them. No, you want to be open, you want to be as grateful as possible, even for the smallest things. Right? They say about Rabbi Dr. Haskell Lookstein of KJ in New York, Upper East Side. They say that, you might have passed him in the street and his hat would blow off and you reach out and picked it up. The next day you would get a handwritten note from him saying, thank you very much for picking up my hat. A little thing, but you know how much it makes a difference to the recipient? And how much it shows that Rabbi Lookstein was cognizant of every little favor, every little thing to be grateful for in life. If we added up everything we could be or should be grateful in life, it would way surpass all of our little kvetches that we have in life, things that are not going well. It's just that we ignore, we gloss over the things that we should be grateful for. Next, we have Rabbi Steinsaltz, who says, well, God drowned the Egyptians in the sea. Who cares? What difference did that make to us? As long as we got across in dry land, what difference did it make to us that they drowned? Why are we saying, thank you, God? He says, back to it, remember our children who drowned in the Nile? He says that we were saying, thank you, God. We recognize that until now, we were dealing with our own tragedies because we felt that you were an unjust God. Now we see that you're a just God. Yes, it's painful. We know we don't want to see anybody suffering or dying, but we know that God is a just God. Our babies that died now have some kind of justice being wrought on their behalf. And then we have Rabbi Sachs, who focuses on, amongst a number of things, he says, we thank God for when we left Egypt, we took the spoils of Egypt with us. We had the wealth, the assets. He says the word in the Torah, v'nitzaltem es Mitzrayim, and you shall bespoil Egypt. V'nitzaltem might also be understood that you should save Egypt. Why did we save Egypt when we took the spoils from them? Had we not done so, we would have remained forever harboring ill feeling towards them. We would have been upset. Anytime you heard the word Egyptian or saw an Egyptian, you would have wanted to spit in their face. That's how angry we would have been at the Egyptians for the way they treated us. Now we walked out with some kind of restitution. Now we could deal with our own internal issues. We could be at peace with it. Sometimes the problem isn't we're concerned about the other person. In order to create a peace within ourselves, we need to make compromises. And finally, the last part of the Seder I'd like to look at is in every generation, how we examine, how we see ourselves leaving Egypt. Says Rabbi Twerski, a person is obligated, liros es atzmo, to look at himself. He says, look at yourself. See your meitzarim, see your constraints in life, what's holding you back, and work on them. Don't ignore them. That's the message of B'chol Dovder in every generation. Says Rabbi Steinsaltz, why is it in every generation that we should view ourselves? Because what happened to Egypt is God bestowed upon us a liberated spirit so that every future time that we would be subjugated, we could rise above. We could feel, you know what? That they might think that they're in control, but really, God is in control, I'm in control. We never live with that victimhood that we see amongst other nations. We're always able to be resilient, get up again, knowing that we have been freed from the moment we left Egypt. And finally, to conclude with Rabbi Sachs, he says that the version of the Rambam Maimonides is not actually liros, one should see, but laharos, one should show oneself. One should demonstrate that you left Egypt. And that's why we do all of these things at the Seder. we lean on a couch, we act like free men, we have somebody pour the wine for us, all of these things to demonstrate that we are free men. Why? Well, it hasn't always been like that throughout our history that we've had these wonderful, affluent, well-to-do, comfortable lives. There have been ups and downs. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not so great. And yet each time at the Pesach Seder, we demonstrate that we are free men. Why? Says Rabbi Sachs, in all other philosophies, you feel something internally, and then that leads to external action. If I feel like it, then I will do it. Not in Judaism. In Judaism, we start with the external, we act a certain way, and then that external leads to internalization. Right? So we act free, we will become free. We do the mitzvahs, whether or not we are feeling it, and eventually we will internalize that. It will become natural to us. It will become important to us. It will become part of our vitality and that of our children and grandchildren. My bracha, my blessing to you all is that you live a Pesach feeling free, acting free. Obviously, we're not quite there yet right this year, but the more we feel it, the more we work on ourselves, the sooner it will happen for you, for all of us, and for all humanity. Chag Kasher v'Sameach, wishing you all a kosher and happy Pesach.